There's a moment in every long-term relationship that almost no one talks about. Not the loud moments, not the obvious ones, the quiet ones, the ones where something shifts and you don't notice it right away. Because if you did, you might stop it. After 22 years of marriage, she thought she knew him. Not just the surface things, like how he took his coffee or what he liked to watch on a Sunday afternoon. She thought she knew the deeper parts, the parts that don't change, the parts that stay. And for a long time, she was right. Their life wasn't dramatic. It wasn't chaotic. It was steady, predictable in the way that feels comforting after a certain age. They had built something real together, a home, a routine, a shared history that stretched across decades. They had raised children, paid bills, sat across from each other at thousands of dinners that blurred into one long, continuous life. And somewhere along the way, love had changed shape. It wasn't intense or unpredictable anymore. It was quiet, stable, reliable, the kind of love people trust. And that's exactly why she never saw it coming. Because betrayal doesn't always start with something obvious. It doesn't always look like secrecy or distance or sudden change. Sometimes it begins with something much smaller. A memory, a name, a feeling that was never fully resolved. Long before he became her husband, before the life they built together, there had been someone else. Her name was Lisa. They met in college, at a time when everything feels bigger than it really is. When emotions are intense, decisions feel permanent, and love feels like something that defines who you are. She was different from the people he usually gravitated toward. More unpredictable, more expressive. The kind of person who said what she felt without filtering it first. And back then, that kind of energy pulled him in. They had something real. Not necessarily stable, not necessarily sustainable, but real enough to leave a mark. They talked for hours. About everything. About the future, about their fears, about the kind of lives they imagined for themselves. And for a while, it felt like those lives would include each other. But like a lot of relationships that begin at that stage of life, it didn't last. There wasn't one big moment that ended it. No betrayal. No dramatic fight. Just distance. Timing. Different directions. The kind of ending that doesn't feel finished, just interrupted. And that's what made it dangerous. Because some relationships don't end cleanly. They don't close. They just fade out. And when something fades instead of ends, it leaves behind a question. What if, for years, that question stayed buried under everything else? Under work, responsibilities, family life. It didn't feel important anymore. It didn't feel relevant. Until one day it was. The invitation came quietly. A college reunion. 25 years. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Just another event. Another reminder of how much time had passed. He wasn't even sure he wanted to go. But she encouraged him. She told him it might be good. A chance to reconnect, to see old friends, to revisit a part of his life he hadn't thought about in a long time. She trusted him. Completely. And that's what makes this story so difficult. Because the moment that changed everything didn't look like a mistake. It looked like something harmless. The reunion was exactly what you'd expect at first. Familiar faces that looked slightly different. Conversations that started with the same questions. Where are you now? What have you been doing? Can you believe it's been this long? It was easy, light, predictable, until he saw her, Lisa, standing across the room like no time had passed at all. And in that moment, nothing dramatic happened. No one noticed anything unusual. There was no sudden realization, no obvious shift. But inside him something moved. Something he hadn't felt in years. They spoke like people who had once known each other deeply. Not awkward, not distant. Just familiar. The kind of conversation that doesn't need effort. At first, it stayed in the past. Old memories. Stories. Moments they both remembered slightly differently. But eventually, the conversation changed. It always does. They started talking about who they had become, about the lives they ended up living, about the choices they made and the ones they didn't. And somewhere in that conversation, something subtle but important happened. They stopped talking like people who used to know each other and started talking like people who still did. That night didn't end with anything obvious. No physical boundary crossed. No decision made. Nothing that would clearly define what had just happened. But something had already started. When he came home, everything looked the same. The same house. The same routine. The same person sitting across from him at the table. But something felt different. Not in a way you could point to. Not in a way you could explain. Just slightly off. And that's how it begins. Not with distance, but with presence that feels different. At first, it was small things. Moments that didn't quite fit. He checked his phone more often. Not excessively, just enough to be noticeable. He seemed distracted sometimes. Not unhappy, not withdrawn, just somewhere else. She noticed. Not immediately as a problem, just as a feeling. Because when you've spent that many years with someone, you don't need evidence to sense a change. You just feel it. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Stress, work, normal shifts that happen over time. But the feeling didn't go away. And then the messages started. At first, they were simple, casual, easy to explain. A follow-up from the reunion. A shared memory. A conversation that picked up where it left off. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like closure. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. But conversations like that don't stay simple for long, especially when they involve something that was never fully resolved. The messages became more frequent, then more personal, then more meaningful. They started talking every day, not about the past anymore, about their lives, their thoughts, the things they didn't say to anyone else. And that's when the line started to blur. Because emotional connection doesn't announce itself as a problem. It feels like understanding, like comfort, like something you've been missing without realizing it. He didn't think of it as betrayal. Not at first. He thought of it as something that made him feel different, more present, more aware of himself, more like the person he used to be. And that's what made it dangerous. Because it wasn't about her. It was about who he felt like when he was talking to her. Back at home, the changes became harder to ignore. He wasn't distant in an obvious way. He still showed up, still followed the routine, still sat at the same table every night. But something was missing. Or maybe something had been moved. The attention, the emotional energy, the part of him that used to exist inside the marriage. It wasn't gone. It was just somewhere else. She started asking questions. Not directly at first. Just small observations. Noticing things. Bringing up the way he seemed distracted. He brushed it off. Said it was nothing. Said he was just tired. And for a while, that was enough. Until it wasn't. Because the more he avoided the conversation, the more real the silence became. And eventually, silence becomes its own kind of answer. The moment everything changed didn't come with a warning. It never does. It was just an ordinary night. A quiet moment. A phone left in the wrong place at the wrong time. And a message that wasn't meant to be seen. I never stopped wondering about you. That's all it took. Not proof of everything, but enough to understand what had been happening. Enough to realize that this wasn't just a conversation. It was something more. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. Not completely. He tried to explain it in a way that made it sound smaller than it was. Less intentional. Less real. He said it wasn't physical. He said it didn't mean anything. He said he didn't know how it happened. But then she asked the one question that mattered. Do you love her? And he hesitated. Not long. Just enough. And in that hesitation, everything became clear. Because the truth isn't always in what someone says. Sometimes it's in what they can't. What happened after that wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment where everything ended. Just a slow unraveling. Conversations that didn't go anywhere. Explanations that didn't fix anything. Silence that stretched longer than it should. Because once something like that happens, you can't go back to what things were. You can try, but you can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. And more importantly, you can't forget what it revealed. In the end, it wasn't just about what he did. It was about what it meant. That part of him had never fully let go of something else. That something unresolved had been sitting quietly beneath everything they built together. And when the opportunity came, it didn't take much to bring it back. He didn't leave in a dramatic way. No big announcement. No clear ending. Just distance. Space. Time apart. The kind of ending that doesn't feel like an ending at first, but becomes one anyway. And she was left with something much harder than anger. Clarity. Because she realized something that changed everything. She wasn't competing with another woman. She was competing with a version of the past that never had to deal with reality. And that's not something you can win against. So the question isn't whether the reunion broke the marriage. It's whether the marriage was already carrying something unresolved, waiting for the right moment to surface. And maybe the real question is this. If the person you love starts coming alive somewhere else, would you recognize it? Or would you trust them until it's too late?